Today, we are here with Reagan Reese. Reagan Reese is the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. Thank you so much for coming on tonight, Reagan.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Now, first off, I just want to ask you in general, how has your week been going as the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller?
It's been great. I'm a little bummed that the White House didn't give me the scoop on where President Joe Biden was going to spend tonight. I knew it was a long shot, but I had my fingers crossed that maybe they wanted to do one little last hurrah with the Daily Caller.
Yes, so Joe Biden, he is not at Kamala Harris's watch party. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're right. He's at the White House right now. He's with Jill Biden and a bunch of longtime aides, and he's, making calls to get Democrats who win in states and just watching the election results pour in instead of being at Howard University with Kamala Harris at her watch party.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think he's not even making an appearance for his vice president, for his right-hand woman?
Well, I actually think it speaks a lot to the terse relationship between the two. And, what we've seen in the past couple of weeks is that the Harris campaign has tried to distance itself from President Joe Biden. First, it started with, we are going to be different from him, and we don't want to, have the same policies as this guy. We're going to be better. And then it became so much as, so please don't join us on the campaign trail. Axios reported that President Biden was asking to join Harris on the campaign trail, and instead her campaign just kept saying, we'll get back to you. And so the president was coping with that by scheduling his own events. This is coming out of Axios. And then, and that was all from this nervousness that the campaign felt that Biden was a liability. And almost as perfect timing as there could ever be, right after that report comes out, President Biden calls Trump supporters garbage. And now that overshadows Harris's closing arguments. And, she's forced to clean up for that. And so I think what we're seeing right now with Biden not at Kamala Harris's watch party comes from this tense relationship. It comes from Harris wanting to be different from Joe Biden. And I think it comes from maybe a little bit of frustration with Joe Biden being sidelined by Vice President Kamala Harris, because she wouldn't be here if Biden didn't pick her as his running mate.
Definitely. And, you're seeing in the mainstream media a lot of left-wing pundits saying that all these things that Joe Biden has done that have hurt the Harris campaign, from calling Trump supporters garbage to maybe even skipping out on this party to even all the way back to when he put on the MAGA hat at, I don't even know what event he was at. They're just calling him, oh, that's just Grandpa Joe. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He's just having fun. He's just, relaxing, and you shouldn't pay attention to that. But
yeah,
as someone...
Can I jump in on something
yes,
right
please.
There? Yeah. A little bit ago, he said something about, it wasn't Donald Trump being a fascist, but I forget exactly what the remark was, but he made some remark. He slammed Donald Trump. It was, he said, lock him up. We want to lock him up. And then he tried to correct himself and said, politically, we want to lock him up. A Biden administration official in response to that said the reality is that in a couple of days, no one's going to remember that Joe Biden said that. And for better or for worse, he's kind of fallen off and no one is listening to the president. And so that's how he's kind of been cast this entire election cycle since he's been dropped out of the race. And it's sad. And it's also concerning because the president of the United States seems to almost be irrelevant at this point.
Definitely. And I want to pivot for a second because you play a very crucial role for the Daily Caller as the White House correspondent. Being inside that press briefing room with everyone's favorite Karine Jean-Pierre, were there any events that happened that led up to the election that you honestly foresaw coming before the general public did, being inside the room where it happened?
Interesting. That's a really good question. I'll say, just to speak broadly about the vibe around the White House and the White House briefing room, attendance in the White House briefing rooms, and this is just me observing, how many empty seats there are in the briefing rooms. It's been down. It's because, I would assume, because reporters are hitting the campaign trail, but that also speaks to the fact that people are less interested in this press briefing, less interested in hearing what the president has to say. One thing that I really think I could have saw coming, just being around the White House so often, it's how the media really carried that Atlantic story we saw, talking about John Kelly's comments, calling Trump a Nazi and saying that he would be a fascist. The Atlantic story, had various elements that the Trump campaign and other main characters in the story went on the record to say these are false, tried to disprove them. And despite all of that, with all the problems with the Atlantic story that the Trump campaign is contesting, the media allowed Vice President Kamala Harris to give an unexpected address from her residence, parroting this story, highlighting this story, calling Trump a fascist, and they allowed her to run with it. And that, is why we saw her kind of be able to pick up this narrative to continue to call President Trump a threat to democracy. And that really didn't come as any surprise to me, because this is the same White House press corps that turned a blind eye to President Joe Biden's failing fitness and then acted so surprised when they didn't see it coming, when all of a sudden Democrats were so alarmed by Biden's fitness and wanted him to drop out.
Definitely. And in your opinion, do you think this concerted effort to paint Donald Trump as a fascist and the blatant lies about Trump's affiliation with Project 2025, his goals, especially in relation to abortion, do you think this concerted effort from the media and just the White House in general, do you think that has helped Kamala Harris, or do you think that has actually hurt her in the long run?
I think we're going to know that more concretely as we start to look at the exit polls and we see, honestly, how tonight plays out. But I was largely skeptical of her decision to go with this threat to democracy messaging, to have her closing arguments at the ellipse, to draw on the fact that where her closing arguments are the same place from where Donald Trump spoke to his supporters before the January 6th Capitol riot. This is the messaging that we saw President Joe Biden, really go to bat for. It was something that his advisors reportedly were telling him they were kind of concerned about how it was landing with voters, that they felt like they should go with some other messaging. And President Biden said, no, I want to keep calling Trump this threat to democracy. And, President Biden definitely dropped out because of fitness concerns, but he also was lagging in the polls because that messaging wasn't landing, because he was telling voters, he was focusing more on democracy, telling voters that they should care about democracy rather than telling them how he was going to fix the economy, rather than caring about the fact that their grocery bills are so high or caring about the concerns they have about the border. You're in a real tough position when you're trying to convince Americans to care about an issue rather than talking to them about issues that they care about. And so, because we know this was such a problem for President Biden, I found it kind of perplexing. And I saw a lot of people consider it desperate in the final weeks of the Kamala Harris campaign to pivot to this fascist and Nazi and threat to democracy rhetoric. And we're definitely going to know concretely if that was the right or wrong move tonight.
Definitely. Well, we'll look forward to seeing if that really had any effect. And just want to say thank you so much, Reagan, for coming on the show. This is Reagan Reese from the Daily Caller, and I'm Elise McCue from the Tony Kinnett cast on the Daily Signal. We'll be back soon.